Story is from For Your Corpse Husband, '04. Homophobic parents made my life hell for 2 months, so I gave them a taste of their own medicine. Background. So back when I was 15, I had a father who we'll call Deadbeat Joe. Deadbeat Joe was the stereotypical deadbeat father, as he almost never contacted me of his own volition, and he resisted paying my mother child support whenever he could, because he hated her as she left him and took his baby away from him. So he took it out on me. His words, not mine. My mother, being the saint she was, never talked bad about him and tried to endorse a relationship between us throughout my entire childhood. I did love Deadbeat Joe and would often want to spend time with him, but to no avail because he was always busy getting his dick wet with some rather questionable women, so I was basically forgotten about by him until the few occasions when he realized he remembered that he did have an older son. Because of that, I was raised by my mother and my stepfather, who I call Dad. They really loved and still do love me, and they worked their asses off to make sure that I was well cared and provided for. Unfortunately, me and my family had to move away to another state when I was 12, which meant that my parents ended up buying a house which we moved into. Now, something to mention up to this point, we were very poor, and my parents ended up buying a house after getting a great deal for it. However, the house was and is very poor quality, and my parents didn't know that, so we ended up basically getting scammed. My mother lost her job, and over time, we ended up becoming so poor that we ended up having to rely on food banks to supply us with the food necessary to survive. Luckily, or rather unluckily, Deadbeat Joe and his new wife, who we'll call Chris, said that they'd take me in and that they had a good, decent quality of life which my parents bought, because to my mother, Deadbeat Joe didn't really seem like the type of guy who would lie about something that big. So despite my objections, I hated Deadbeat Joe by this point, I went to go live with Deadbeat Joe and Chris, plus their kids, due to the fact that my real parents were about to lose our home at the time, and they didn't want me to be homeless along with them. At first, they were very welcoming, but after a few weeks things started to change. Both Chris and Deadbeat Joe had lied, and they were just as poor as my parents were. Over time, Chris had started to show the volatile side of herself, and Deadbeat Joe found out I was gay, which was a problem due to the fact that he was very Christian. They both really hated how I was LGBT, despite claiming otherwise as Deadbeat. Joe felt that I needed mental help, because he felt that being gay was an illness. They tried to force me to conform to their beliefs that being gay was wrong, but I refused, which made them very angry. Chris also ended up just being horrible and manipulative to me on a regular basis, as she would do things like set up a schedule for the time of when us kids could do certain things, refused to let me go to school for no good reason, threatened to isolate me from her entire family if I didn't do what she wanted me to, etc. Due to all of this, it caused me a lot of stress and anxiety over the 2 months I stayed there, and I would cry a lot in the corner of my room, wishing that the fuses that kept breaking would set the house on fire and take me with it. It built up a lot of anger and resentment within me, and all of the things that Chris and Deadbeat Joe would do and say to me. After a while, the hostility in the house built up, and I would eventually be accused of being a pedophile who wanted to molest my brothers, because Chris said that someone looked up child porn on her cell phone. Deadbeat Joe ended up taking away my phone and threatening me with knives, which culminated to me taking my phone back and running away to hide in the bushes outside of the trailer park we lived in. The cops came. My parents manipulated the situation to make it seem like I was a terrible child, and they left. The next week was a living hell afterwards, as Chris and Deadbeat Joe kept trying to get a confession out of me and kept threatening me, but I held my ground and was able to leave their house and move back in with my parents. By this point, I was seething with rage, but I didn't do anything to them as I wanted to move on. However, a month after I left her house, I remembered the smug face Chris made throughout the week. She kept me a prisoner in her house and kept trying to ruin my life. I decided that I hated her too much to not retaliate against her and her husband, so that's what I ended up doing. The revenge? I decided that I would sign Chris up for all the spam junk mail I could find using the information I could find online and on the school directory of the school she worked at. Looking to hear the sacred word of Scientology? Click. Want to hear about our products that will fall apart after one use? Click. Want to see some hot women get it on with each other? Click, click, click. Next, I decided to send Chris's family some recordings I took of some of the things that she would say to me. During my stay at Chris's house, I had recorded the things that she was saying to me, so I had evidence to show my parents that she was abusing me. I ended up sending those recordings to all of her close friends and family before blocking them. They were very bad, so it wouldn't have surprised me if some of them ended up distancing themselves from her after listening to it. Lastly, I decided that I would continue to make Deadbeat Joe pay my mother for what he owed her in child support. I was originally going to ask my real dad to adopt me, but after learning of how much money Deadbeat Joe had to send my mother, around $200 per month, I did the math and concluded out of spite that I would let my mother keep on milking him for what he was worth until I turned 18. It's going to be quite a bit of time before I become an adult too, as currently I am 16. So by the time I have turned 18, DJ will have to legally pay my mother $25,000 over the next few years of my life, which is definitely not something to sniff at. Resolution. I never heard back from my evil parents after I carried out my revenge against them, so I don't really know how their immediate reaction towards what I'd done. However, after going back to the school directory to see if any changes were made to it, I discovered that almost all of the teachers' info was scrubbed from the site, and my stepmother name was nowhere to be found. I connected the dots and it made me realize that I had caused an entire site-wide change, and the reason why I'd never heard back from my abusive parents was because of how badly I had humiliated Chris, and I knew that Chris would have flogged Deadbeat Joe if he dared try to talk to me again. After realizing this, I laughed so hard I almost pissed myself, and I left the school's website. Currently, I am studying for an exam that will earn me certification in an aspect of designing which is important for the field I want to get into. I am taking my education seriously, and I now have opportunities that I wouldn't have been afforded had I stayed at Chris's house. I have made some new friends and have now moved on from the things that my parents did to me. TLDR. Evil homophobic bio dad and stepmother make my life a living hell for 2 months. I enact my revenge, and now they have to pay my real parents $25,000 over the next 2 years of my life and have gotten outed as abusers to their family and friends. The revenge was perfect and satisfying. OP abusive father and his wife tortured OP for months, but finally OP retaliated brutally, destroying his father's reputation to ground and made him pay a handsome amount as childcare. It is really the best method to deal with abusive and toxic parents. The revenge was really cool and satisfying. The next story is from an unknown user. I catfished a former boss to get paid. I used to work for a married couple, Billy, M52, and Gigi, F44, who owned a business services public relations agency. It lasted more or less for a year. They seemed nice and humble, but in reality they were shady and untruthful. The company began to falter because of poor management and zero intention to prioritize. Billy was your baby-faced next-door neighbor type. He looked about 10 years younger and had a kind smile. He was soft-spoken and had an artistic and creative flair to him. Gigi looked matronly, with a Mother Earth incarnate attitude towards her children. She prided herself on being ruthless when it came to giving her family only the best. She could be really nice when she wanted to, but I found out early on that she was 100% apt at gossip and being two-faced. The company's constant changes were a red flag. They went from a business services plus PR agency to an IT provider, then to a business incubator, and finally to indie beer partners. What I'm trying to say is that they tried to dip their donut in everyone's coffee, figuratively. Some of us had no real way to escape. The lady working next to me was already 67 years old and scared that no one would hire her. I wasn't in a great place either. We were 8 employees in total, They wouldn't lay anyone off because they believed that the employee should quit. They paid us only a portion of our salaries, incomplete weekly payments. Employees would run for the hills once they found a better job. Some of us were stuck. It was horrible. Then they would pay the normal rate for a month and then do it again. They never cut down on their luxury expenses, so the wife would post her shopping sprees or arrive in a new car like it was nothing. Zero empathy. Very insensitive. The husband was obsessed with making it big time. So much that he sometimes failed to see an opportunity right in front of him. He said he was Coca-Cola's brand manager. I swear I looked it up and could never find any reference. Gigi had a display full of small local magazines, mostly about design and architecture. They were very proud to be a team member, but in reality, they just helped them print 2 issues. They wanted big business only, but in the meantime, looked down upon tangible potential clients, like the young Latino couple who showed up trying to learn more about their services. They seemed lost because they wanted someone to help them set up a coffee business and had no idea how it was done. I talked to them and helped them into the waiting room. They even showed up with their baby in a stroller. That means they must have driven by and decided to come in. An impulsive client should be retained. The guy said his grandpa had a farm and he wanted to create an import-exports company. Once Billy showed up, he listened for a bit, then kind of gave them an abrupt dismissal. That was a dick move because that couple opened their own business with someone else and even have a FB page. It could have been Billy. Billy lined his office walls with posters of Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. His wife, the chief enabling officer, put up signs on each room. The main employee area was the machine room. Billy's office was the chamber. The conference room was a meeting of the minds. Every time an employee disagreed with Billy during a brainstorming session, Gigi would call them aside and tell them that Billy is your boss. You need to know that he is brilliant and a genius. I want him to have that taste of success. I experienced that firsthand. I also hated brainstorming because that was never on my job description. They just wanted to pick everyone's brains. In the meantime, we had to see the Pandora jewelry, the expensive makeovers for their daughters, and the weekend at the spa updates on FB. Gigi's captions were usually about rewarding herself after a hard week, or because she deserved it. Oh, and I'd like to mention that they bought into the social guru phrases about emotional direction. So if an employee ever got angry, Gigi would tell you, remember the one who gets angry is the one who ends up losing. For anyone who's been in this situation, you may understand how painful it can be. You cannot leave the job because you have no other job waiting for you. And pathetic as it may sound to some income is better than no income at all. This is an involuntary compromise, and it's abusive. Why were we expected to pay for their luxuries via incomplete wages? My best friend's ex is into coding and programming, and he agreed to help. If it didn't work out, at least we would have something to laugh about. We created a kick-ass fake website with a matching LinkedIn and the whole 9 yards. To make a long story short, this was supposed to be an investment company and my friend would be very casual. Nothing too eager. He started by liking my employer's FB page, then comment. Before we knew, my boss took the bait and was engaging. They exchanged emails and he was eager to share all his projects and ambitions. On the other side, the investor sent him a list of requirements like proof of concept, employer payroll, EIN, RERS, etc. The investor agreed to work them if they could prove they were legit and up to date. No bank account of confidential info was asked. Within 3 weeks, I was paid the equivalent to the 2 months and a half I was owed. The investor did an about face and never contacted him again. I left the job as soon as I could. My friend, who remained until she got paid, told me our boss seemed off and a bit down after he announced big things are coming. But it all seemed to deflate. I never disclosed what was really going on. Edit. My boss wasn't scammed into paying money to the fake website. He was catfished into updating employee salaries that he owed. Edit. I expanded the story. Edit. For anyone who doesn't understand the story, No money was paid, asked for, or wired from my boss to the investor. We baited his greedy character and told him that if he could prove everything was in order, the investment would happen. This included the payroll. No confidential information was asked for, offered, seen, or reviewed. He paid everyone what he owed them. The payment was made to each worker as usual. No one stole money via any website. He just did his due diligence. EIN numbers and what we asked for are not confidential. The revenge was brilliant and flawless, and it was executed strategically. By exploiting Billy's greed with a fake investment opportunity, OP and the tech guy compelled him to pay the wages of workers. It was one of the best revenge stories I have ever read. The revenge was perfect and satisfying. Next story is from ordinary_diamond_158. How I got my boss fired when he tried to fire me. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. This is a bit long, but I promise it is worth the ride. TL, DR at the bottom. This story was posted on a different site by me about a year ago, but this sub seems to be the perfect place to share it again. I have added some additional details that prior commentators were asking for last time I posted this. Starting out, let me explain why there wasn't a mass walkout, and I am the only one that quit despite us basically being terrorized and treated like slaves. The job market was in shambles in my city at that time, with something like a 40% unemployment rate. I knew someone with a doctorate degree in theoretical physics working at a local fast food joint, as it was literally the only place hiring. The city had quick access to 4 research universities, but he got downsized due to lower admission rates. He is now the dean of the physics department at his former school. To quit any job, no matter how bad, was financial suicide, and a guarantee that you would not find a new one. I always worked customer service, food service, and hospitality since I was 14. At 24, I decided it was time to find a job with benefits and potential for career advancement. So I took a job stocking shelves overnight with a global monstrosity that started out as a mom-and-pop store. I felt right at home. I worked hard and constantly took the worst jobs and the worst days off to make sure I would be there on the weakest staffing days to rub elbows with management. If there was anything that occasionally came up that no one on the shift was trained to do, I would come in on my day off without pay to get trained how to do the task, like keys, paint, accounting issues, etc., to become less disposable and more versatile. It worked, and 10 months in, I found myself with an offer to promote to low-level management starting January 1st. Starting the weekend before Thanksgiving, the overnight manager started to understaff shifts to preserve his end-of-year bonus, and acted surprised when people called out. He would then bully us into staying over with threats of write-ups for not finishing our assigned stocking tasks. Upper management was notorious for just signing off on write-ups without looking into their validity, so each staff being assigned 13+ hours of labour to complete alone in 6 hours, while typically it was approximately 4.5 hours to account for tending to customers as well, was no defence. Since an employee could only get 2 of those write-ups in a rolling 13-month period before termination, we all would stay over, as well as skip our breaks and lunches to finish. Those write-ups were also less job-threatening, as he would simply turn a blind eye to us, clocking out for break, lunch, and returning to work. But there was a catch. Since any approved overtime would count against his $73,000 bonus, approximately 0.11 per approved hour, he would never file the approval forms for the OT. This meant that it was considered unapproved, meaning that we were required to get approval to cut hours off our regular shifts to equal out what we stayed over. He, of course, never approved us to cut those hours. This was resulting in weekly write-ups from the same manager for unapproved overtime on those of us that made it to work every day despite the weather and missed holiday get-togethers with our families. Every week we would get our write-up and he would get praise for getting everything done with less approved staffing hours than typically allocated. Thankfully, write-ups for unapproved OT didn't carry a lot of weight, but for 3 months they counted against your points for promotion opportunities. This went on until the week before Christmas. When I got my weekly write-up, I was told by the store manager, who offered me my promotion, I would be suspended for overtime abuse the next time my manager submitted a write-up for unapproved overtime hours. Determined to not lose my promotion, I started telling the manager no. The second time, I refused to stay over without him signing an overtime approval form and giving me a physical signed copy. Before I hit overtime, he wrote me up for abusive actions towards a member of management and actions with intent to undermine the integrity of management and store policies. This instantly cost me my promotion, which greatly upset me, and then, like the idiot he is, he left me alone in his office to sign the write-ups and the acknowledgement that I was no longer promoting. Initially, I was going to just accept it and resolve myself to spending the next 13 months working my tail off for minimum wage and go up for promotion as soon as they fell off. When I started reading the acknowledgement form, I found I was not eligible to promote to management until I was write-up free for 5 years. This meant 6 years and 1 month before I could even try to get promoted again. All because I followed policy. So rather than sign it, I wrote "F" in Sharpie across his brand new desk, which he got for being such a great manager, walked out of his office, handed him my vest and name tag, shredded the write-ups and tossed them into the air like confetti, and told his no longer smug face that it was now my personal mission to get him fired. He lost his cockiness when it sunk in. I'd just quit. I could see little beads of panic sweat forming on his forehead as he realized that the only person capable of performing certain highly essential functions for his shift was walking out the door. He shouted after me, telling me that he could talk to the general manager and see if he could get the time frame cut down to 3 years. He offered to approve all of my overtime the rest of the season, offered me a cut of his bonus, and several other offers I can't remember. Honestly, if he'd offered to withdraw the write-ups, which was still 100% an option but he never offered, I wouldn't have accepted it, but I might not have followed through on my threat. I was too angry and too determined, and I didn't care if I became homeless as long as I never had to work there again. Now, how did I get him fired? Well, due to certain ADA requirements, I was permitted to carry a voice recorder with me at work so I could record important meetings, announcements, and reminders. When I got written up the first time for unapproved overtime, I started recording his requests to both me and co-workers. I never used them to dispute the write-ups, but I never deleted them either. So I uploaded all the recordings to my computer, nearly 18 hours of audio, and sent it to the Home Office, CCing every store manager and compliance officer in the district. When I went in for my last paycheck, he was long gone. I was offered my promotion back, but I declined. The regional director then offered me my old manager's job, with a $73,000 hiring bonus. Wonder where that came from, LOL. But I still refused and said I was never returning to retail. My former manager's boss laughed and told me that everyone returns eventually, and when I did come see her, and she would find me a management spot somewhere. After 5 months of being unemployed, living with my mom and barely surviving, I moved to another state and got a job working in a state prison as a guard, and am very fulfilled. TLDR. After working hard to earn a promotion, my penny-pinching tyrant of a manager forced me to lose it. So I reported his shady practices and got him fired and was offered his job. I refused and am far happier now. The revenge was truly satisfying and brutal. The manager got deserving consequences for his unethical behavior and refusal to pay overtime. It is satisfying to see the manager losing his job. The most satisfying part comes when OP gets his original promotion and a hefty bonus and raised salary. It was really a perfect revenge. Interesting pro-revenge story is from disgruntled_tofu. Malicious compliance thought this belonged here, and a power-tripping mod over there decided to remove the original post after breaking his own commenting rules and getting called out. A recent story reminded me of this act of malicious compliance by a family member. This family member's spouse passed was involved in an accident that left them critically injured. They were in ICU for months and would face permanent disability upon returning home. They didn't want to leave their home. It was close to the best hospital in the region, and it was their forever home. So plans began to renovate it for accessibility. In addition to the renovations, a wheelchair van was going to be needed along with other medical equipment for home use. As she worked on all of this, it was clear that large expenditures were going to be needed, and it was going to take time to draw money out of long-term savings and retirement accounts. So she called the credit card companies to get their limit increased. Sadly, before the renovations were complete, her spouse passed away after almost 6 months of hospitalization and therapy. Now attention turned to final arrangements. The couple had always been very frugal and maintained nearly perfect credit. All cards were being paid on time, and despite carrying a balance on some cards from the construction, demolition had already started, so renovations had to continue, but at a slower pace. Money was now coming in from those long-term savings. The problem is, one major credit card company refused to work with her. She tried to access the account and was told, "Sorry, I have to speak the account holder." She explained that her spouse had passed away and she was wanting to pay what was left on the card. She also explained that she was an account holder. Evil Bank stated that she was not on the account. She was a mere card holder and she had no rights to the account. The person on the phone explained that her husband opened the account without her and just gave her the card. She just didn't understand how credit cards worked. This was a lie. The couple had always been joint account holders on everything since they were first married for exactly this reason. They had done extensive estate planning and made sure that all their assets were protected in trusts should the worst occur. They knew their kids would be cared for, and their partner would be able to access everything. Also, she ran the couple's business for over a decade, navigating a sea of regulations, insurance company billing, and payroll, finances, taxes. Needless to say, she did not enjoy being condescended to. Unfortunately, Evil Bank would not budge. They would not allow any access to the account for any reason, but for some reason, they didn't cancel the card after finding out the sole account holder had passed away. This back and forth went on for weeks with multiple calls to the Evil Bank and trying to escalate the issue to supervisors to address the state of the account. In a final attempt to show Evil Bank that they were hurting themselves by this, "So I'm unable to access any part of the account, even to make a payment?" Evil Bank: "That's right." "So the account is going to be closed?" Evil Bank: "No, only the account holder can do that." "Even though the account holder is dead?" Evil Bank: "Only the account holder, ma'am." "So what does that mean for card holders and being able to charge on the account?" Evil Bank: "Only the account holder can deactivate a card or modify the account." "So what happens if a card holder uses their card?" Evil Bank: "They can continue to use the card until the account holder tells us otherwise." The deceased account holder. Evil Bank: "Yes, I can't help you with anything else. You need to put the account holder on the phone if you want to change anything or make a payment." "No, that's fine." She broke down crying immediately after, but decided that they set the rules, so she would play by them. All the final expenses, medical bills, and as much construction cost as possible was put onto that credit card. She maxed it out and then let it sit until the credit card company started calling for payment. "I'm sorry. Per your policy, I'm just the card holder and I'm not responsible for any balance." "Ma'am, this balance needs to be paid or it will affect your credit." "It better not. I'm not on the account." "This is an illegal collections call and I will be reporting it to the FTC and the Attorneys General in your home state and mine. I still have his number on speed dial. You can make your case to the court." She was used to getting medical insurance companies to pay claims for the last decade or so. You didn't want to play hardball with her. Remember how all the assets were in trusts? On paper, her partner had no assets to place a lien on. All the cash in the joint checking account had been used to pay expenses for the last several months, and withdrawals from long-term savings were sent to her account, not the joint account. They had agreed to move all exposed assets shortly after her partner regained consciousness, fearing the worst. Plus, all the income from the business had been brought home in her name for more than a decade, so she would actually get some kind of social security payment when she got older. So not only did his estate have no assets to go after, he didn't have an income for the last decade. Evil Bank was left with a maxed out credit card and no assets in the estate they could file against for payment. The handful of other credit cards companies worked with her to raise limits temporarily or remove daily spending caps for large expenditures. And they were all paid without a single missed, late, or partial payment. Evil Bank had to eat a 5-figure loss, all because they decided that the wife didn't deserve to be on the account from day one. She had every intention to pay every bill and expense. She has never been one to try to scam or cheat someone. She gave Evil Bank every chance to accept money for the bill. They repeatedly refused to acknowledge her as a spouse or executor. But she sure liked the irony of the only company that refused to acknowledge the death of her spouse ended up paying for the funeral expenses. It was a huge blow for the Evil Bank. OP faced the Evil Bank with intelligence and showing a lot of resilience and finally hit with a heavy blow, causing the bank a huge loss. The revenge was really satisfying and cool. Here we go for the pro-revenge story. Fiancé left me due to my cancer diagnosis. I left her destitute. This has been 4 years ago, so the sting is gone and my revenge has been had. Sorry if this isn't the right forum. We dated for 4 years and had what I thought was a great relationship. We were both well-established professionals who both owned homes in the same neighborhood and both with daughters in the home. Her daughter was 11 and mine was 16 when we met. We had actually planned to get married, build a house, and raise the two together. We planned the house build because she had recently been diagnosed with a neurological disease that would eventually put her in a wheelchair and need something ADA-friendly. During the planning stages, I began doing landscape and construction projects on her home to increase the resale value. All in, I invested roughly $30,000 USD into the home, running everything through my side construction business for tax, permitting, and resale purposes. We had a contract that payment would be made upon the sale of the home. I produced invoices for each and every project, but never pushed for payment because of the prior agreement. Fast forward 6 months, we're looking at property to develop and finalizing drawings on the home when I began feeling ill. I couldn't eat, constantly vomiting and passing blood. I began noticing that my abdomen looked swollen, which was odd because we were both very clean eaters and were in the gym every day. So I went to the doctor and began having tests done. During this time, she began having small cognitive issues, and the stress of her current position was exacerbating her condition, so she took a $20,000 per annum cut in pay along with a lesser position inside the company. After a month or so of different tests and a biopsy, it came back that I had a golf ball-sized tumor in my stomach and would need to begin chemotherapy. So I began chemo and radiation treatments, which made me, expectedly so, extremely ill. She was spending time helping around my place on the weekends and staying over more, to the point that they were both at my home, more than theirs. At this point, I suggested that we go ahead and put one of our houses on the market and move in together until the new house was built. I have great supplemental insurance as well as a long-term illness plan, so using that coupled with the sale of one of our houses would push us through comfortably and help ease the financial stress on her. Shortly after this discussion, she became extremely distant. Her daughter wasn't coming down and hanging out with mine anymore. She had excuses for not getting together. She quit driving me to treatments and stopped staying over. She then dropped a bomb, a sentence that will forever be burned into my psyche. I love you, but I can't see myself taking care of someone this sick in the long term, and I don't think we should see each other any longer. In a text. It broke me. I won't lie. This was the first woman I had ever opened up to and planned a life with since my wife died when my children were 1 and 3. However, I tried to be mature about it. I forced myself to understand her position and to accept what I could not change. I calmly, the next day, gathered all of her things, packed them neatly, loaded them in my truck, and took them to her house to leave on the back porch while she was at work, in order to avoid any awkward exchanges. Walking around the back and under the porch cover, I sat down a box and saw her in her back living room, on the couch having sex with a man that she had introduced to me as a lifelong friend. I had dinner and drinks with this man and his girlfriend. We had gone on vacation with them as well. I never spoke of the incident with her and simply sent her a text later, explaining that I would leave her things on my side porch to pick up at her convenience. I discovered 8 or 9 months later from his now ex-girlfriend that they had broken up due to him confessing that he had been sleeping with my SO, dating back to about the time we were finishing drawings on the new home. Now I'm pissed. Revenge time. At this point, I had finished chemo and radiation for the time being and was feeling healthier. I was going through some much neglected paperwork when I ran across the file that contained $32,680 in unpaid, long overdue invoices, which were promptly sent to my attorney to begin lien proceedings on the home. It turns out that I couldn't have done this a moment too soon because she was set to put her house on the market. Coupled with interest over the course of what was then 19 months overdue, the invoices were hefty. That, along with the agreement of settling them when the house was sold and attorney fees, left her with roughly 10K after the sale of the home and settling her current mortgage. She promptly had to back out of the purchase of another home and moved in with her oldest daughter, Esil, and 2 grandchildren. She also had to leave her job and begin receiving disability. I ran into her a little over a year ago, and she looked as if she had aged 20 years, and was in the wheelchair we had talked about. We chatted cordially but briefly, and I excused myself and went on with my day. A few days later, her younger daughter called me and spoke of my running into her mom, and could we hang out sometime? I gave a vague answer, thanked her for calling, and again went on with my day. The ex then called me a week or so later and began apologizing for leaving me as she did. Again, cordial but short, I thanked her for calling and hung up. She began texting, and this went on for several weeks until one she asked if I could ever see us rekindling what we had, to which I replied, "I can't see myself taking care of someone so sick in the long term. Remember the box on your back porch? Did you think that lifelong friend brought that over to you from my house? Good luck to you. Goodbye." TL. DR. Girlfriend broke up with me due to me having cancer, so I ruined the sale of her home, the purchase of another, and left her to have to move in with her daughter. Then threw her breakup line back at her. I sometimes feel guilt over this, but not much, and not often. The revenge was really bone breaker, financial bone breaker. OP's fiancé showed her dark reality by cheating on OP, and OP retaliated by destroying her financial stability. It was really a satisfying revenge. The next story is from Ike 09161995. Mess with minors in my job? Lose your job and your boyfriend. Hey folks, first post in here. Hopefully it fits here. Throw away, because some folks in the story may know my Reddit, so you know safety and all. Also done on mobile, sorry for formatting. TL, DR at the end because this is a doozy. All right, circa 2014 I worked for a large movie theatre chain in a small Midwestern city. Job was pretty awesome outside and essentially no way to move up. I like to think I am good at my job, and I try my hardest no matter where I work. In this particular situation, I was one of the most tenured employees at the theatre, save for 2 other folks who had worked their part-time on the side and had full-time jobs elsewhere. So for the sake of this story, I need to tell you about Jane, not actual name. Jane started working for the theatre 2 months before me. They worked elsewhere as a supervisor and was looking to move up at the theatre. Right after I started, one of the managers left to work at a different theatre, and the supervisor moved up. We had 2 managers, 1 general manager, basically the highest level at the theatre, and a supervisor, which is a manager in training. This is important. Jane somehow got the supervisor position, even though there was another person who essentially was promised the position due to their continued service at the theatre for almost 8 years. There were rumours about Jane sleeping with the GM when she started, and this situation got them going again. I didn't care too much because why would I? I am but a lowly peon in the corporate machine. Anyways, Jane moved up and the tenured crew member left the company because they got screwed over. Once Jane moved up, we had a whole meeting about her moving up and how the theatre focuses on professionalism and ensuring no favoritism was happening, specifically referencing how normal crew members shouldn't fraternize outside of work with management. Jane didn't really listen to that though. She continued to hang out with the crew members who were mostly underage and would do various things like go drinking with minors, taking them to bars and buying them drinks, or simply buying alcohol at a store and letting them drink at her house. I honestly have no issue with the drinking at home deal, just adding context, as well smoke weed with them and post pictures on Instagram. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Jane had a secret Instagram where they would post pictures of themselves with their friends from the theatre. They chose Instagram because none of their family or their boyfriend used Instagram, and no one would know, right? Even more damning was her relationship with a 19-year-old that worked at the theatre. She had a boyfriend who had been with her for years and honestly supported her for all intents and purposes. Not only did she have a 19-year-old side piece, but also was messing around with a 17-year-old. I even caught them messing around in the break room one time. She essentially threatened me with my job if I told anyone. Honestly, she could have just told me to please be quiet, and I would have just judged her silently. Fast forward about a year or so, and another one of the managers left for a new job. Jane obviously moved up, and someone else took the supervisor position. Now, I won't go into too much detail, but despite my tenure and performance, I was looked over for the promotion. A newer crew member who was really good friends with Jane got the position over me. This was confirmed by the other manager, who let me know that Jane was definitely in good with the GM, who ultimately made the final decision. That being said, I was beginning to sour and making minimum wage for years at a job that couldn't give a shit about my efforts and continued performance. That being said, I was preparing for an exit. Before I get into my exit, it is important to note that Jane had, and most likely still has, a problem with me. I have talked about some issues I had with her, but I never escalated or even confronted her about anything she did to me up to this point. I honestly left it be. But I didn't like her, and the fact I didn't like her, or play along with her infuriated her. So much to the point where she made my life hell at the theatre. When she was a supervisor, she didn't have much power. But when she became manager, she began giving me shifts, convincing people that I was weird and to avoid me. I mean, I am weird, but not like avoid me weird. Threatening me physically, threatening my job. Her and her gang of misfit assholes also slashed my tires. I have no solid proof, but my car was parked in the employee lot, and only employees can get in. Beyond that, she also made fun of my girlfriend, my now wife, for having an invisible illness, MS. She would make her life hell because she had a disability and had some minor limitations. Add together all of this, plus my GF went off to college, plus getting looked over for the promotion, suffice it to say I found a new job. I had a few close friends at the theatre, including my now wife who I met while working there. Silver lining, right? I had let a few of them know about the new job, but told them to keep it on the DL since it was still 2 weeks away. I had put my 2 weeks in with the GM and asked that he also keep it on the DL since Jane and her posse would with me. I told him that I wanted to tell everyone myself, so it kept him quiet. Now the important thing about my new job is that it essentially paid me double my wages from the theatre. All of my friends were stoked for me. I was taking a job that would also have me making more than the managers at the theatre, but also a job that put me on a better track in life. That being said, with Jane and I butting heads on multiple occasions and her track record of messing with me, she decided to get one last attack on me. She started a rumour that I was just going to call out on all of my shifts the 2 weeks before my new job started. With her last act of revenge in motion, the GM approached me and let me know that he wouldn't be scheduling me the last 2 weeks. I tried to explain to him that the rumours were bullshit, that I needed to work because it would be my only source of income. I told him that Jane started the rumour, and I started to tell him all of the other stuff as well. He, of course, didn't believe me and told me that Jane wouldn't do what I was saying she would do. So it was her word versus mine. I contacted my new job, who let me know that my start date was firm and that their budget wouldn't allow me to start until 2 weeks later as originally planned. Now here I am, essentially jobless for 2 weeks. Now I was upset, but I was also lucky. I was still living with family and didn't have to pay rent, so I sucked it up and essentially told myself that I would just take a forced 2-week vacation. But Jane didn't stop there. She escalated again by having one of her cronies call my new job and tell them that I got fired. I was luckily able to talk down my new boss by letting him know that this wasn't the case, that I put my 2 weeks in and everything else, but that was the last straw. I left my last day at the theatre, and while it was sad and I was upset that I wouldn't be able to work out the last 2 weeks of my job that I had for years, I was focused and determined on revenge. Rule number 1 of living a secret life and having a secret Instagram is not adding everybody and their mother to the page. I had a friend of a friend who also didn't care for Jane. Let's call them Joe. Joe and I had gone to high school together and briefly worked at the theatre together. He and Jane were part of the same group at the theatre until they had a small falling out. Nothing crazy, but he wasn't exactly happy with her. I talked to Joe, and we discussed my issues with Jane over some lunch that I bought for him. Food is the key to all revenge plots. Once we ate and discussed my problems with Jane, I asked for his help. I needed access to her Instagram. You know, the secret one, showing her hanging out with underage employees, drinking alcohol and smoking weed with them, and also some mushy posts about her 19-year-old boyfriend, as well as some moderately racy photos with her 17-year-old fling. With very little discussion, he gave me full access. I took screenshots of essentially everything. We are talking 2 to 3 years worth of illicit and moderately illegal activity. More than enough to get her fired and to raise some questions in her relationship. I took the screenshots and I printed them on the highest quality paper material that CVS had to offer. I also copied them to a few flash drives for good measure. I purchased 2 yellow padded envelopes, can never be too safe, and I filled them both with copies of all of the posts as well as a flash drive with additional copies. As well, I included a note in each one for the appropriate parties. One of the envelopes was taped to the back door of the theatre. There was somewhat of a blind spot, so pulled into the parking lot from the rear and snuck around the corner Mission Impossible style to tape the envelope to the back door. On it was the GM's name, as well. In the letter, I merely stated that one of their managers had a secret Instagram with a lot of damning evidence of not only favoritism, but also fraternizing with underage employees, amongst other wrongdoings. In the letter, I also requested her immediate termination, or the information would be provided to the district manager as well as our corporate office. I made sure to put it somewhere the GM would see on his morning sweep when he opened the theatre. The second folder and letter was delivered to her home by Joe. Joe agreed to this as I knew Jane's schedule and had a good idea of when she would be gone, and he knew where she lived from previous hangouts. With both folders delivered, it was only a matter of time. Before I knew it, I was receiving death threats from Jane's gang, all of them saying that they knew it was me and that Jane was going to come after me, that she never did anything to deserve this. It didn't matter to me, of course. I no longer worked there and would hopefully never have to deal with them again. From what I heard, she was taken into the main office of the theatre and the GM let her have it. He ultimately had to fire her because there was very clear proof that she was in direct violation of many of the rules and conditions of her employment. As well, her boyfriend, with proof in hand, kicked her out of his home. Last I heard, she moved farther north and hasn't held down a solid job since. Her family didn't want much to do with her once everything came out with her cheating on her boyfriend. Also, the part about fooling around with a 17-year-old tends not to sit well. In the end, I started my new job without fail and moved on from that place. Haven't seen much of anyone from there since. TLDR. Manager makes my life hell. Continues to hang out and fool around with underage crew members. Lives to regret it. Enjoy losing your job and your boyfriend. The revenge was truly perfect and satisfying. OP did a wonderful job by exposing Jane's hypocrisy and misconduct with undeniable proof. leading to her losing her job and shattering her reputation. This was nothing but the consequences of Jane's actions. The next story is from Cinderella Cookie. I recorded a co-worker loving himself at work for eating my chocolate. Please, respectfully correct me if you see typos or anything because English is not my first language and I want to get better at it. Also, this is my first post here. Before you get to that part, I need to clarify that yes, I have a video, but I would never post it or anything because I would get in trouble for it, and because it's a ridiculous story, it's up to you to believe it or not. Let's name everyone involved in this. John, my boyfriend, the designer. Jenny, me, I did mostly video. Sarah, another co-worker. She was the best photographer there. Mario. To say that he was useless is an understatement. The reason why I'm writing this. Donna, the director's assistant. Amy, the accountant. Years ago, I worked in a government institution where I live. It wasn't a good job. It was basically volunteer paid work that was an excuse to not give employees any security a real job would offer, but I accepted because I needed the money and I had just finished college. I used to work in the communication department with other 4 co-workers. One of them was my boyfriend, still together to this day, and the youngest one, Mario, was a guy who was still in high school and got his girlfriend pregnant. His mum worked in other government institution, and she got him that job. That's one of the reasons the boss couldn't fire him. We had to make designs, take pictures, do video, post on social media, check on the press when they wanted an interview with one of our bosses, and many, many other things. Mario was supposed to know some about photography and design because he told us that's what he was studying at school. But we knew later that he didn't attend school often, so he was very, very bad at almost everything. And we tried to show him how to do his work, but he was really stubborn and lazy. He never learned completely how to do the basic work. He always had problems with many people, not with us at the beginning because he acted polite. That changed later. He was disrespectful when taking pictures. He was late almost every day, and he used to post in social media about government and fight to other people who didn't agree with him. Sarah and John would talk to him about how working in a government institution, you couldn't do that, it's simply not okay. However, he never changed and told his mum we were against him. Mario went to work around 2 to 4 hours a day. Usually, John and Sarah would be the only ones to see him because they worked more hours than the rest of us, but he would stay in the office around 1 or 2 hours alone, or they would send him to take pictures for the same time. One day, he had to take pictures of some event practice. Everyone else was off the clock, it wasn't a big event, and he had been working there around a year by that time, so we thought that he could go by himself. The accountant had to go there and decided to take him with her and one co-worker of hers in her car. He was late again, and that's why he couldn't go in one of the work cars. The accountant left her purse open in that space that's in the middle of the driver and the co-driver's seats. When they went back to the office, she noticed her wallet disappeared. She instantly knew that had to be Mario, the one who took it. They began to search him and our office and found nothing. Somebody found the wallet under the vending machine. At first, we took his side because they admitted that never found anything, and because it wasn't right to search in our office without anybody else there, mostly because we had photography equipment that wasn't exactly cheap. However, when we knew how the wallet was found, and when we talked to him, we knew it was him. More money and stuff disappeared when he was there, but nobody could prove he took them. The bosses didn't want to create a scandal, so they let it happen. Our office used to be the conference room, so it was attached to the kitchen, and the director had beverages there for visits. We could use the kitchen but not touch those beverages, but Mario couldn't even get in there. Anyway, the sodas began to disappear, and the director's assistant complained to us. We said we didn't take them, and she wouldn't believe us. One day, John noticed that our door to the kitchen was broken and that you could take the lock easily. With a pencil, we used to find pencils without tips, he took it inside the mechanism, and then the door opened. It took its time, but he proved that Mario was getting in the kitchen when nobody else was there. However, that didn't make a difference, and nothing was done, not even talking to him. One day, John and me were on our way to work, but I didn't have breakfast, so we stopped at a store. I bought something to eat and a chocolate. I put it inside the fridge and forgot about it. The next day, I remembered about it and went to check. It wasn't there and I got mad. John and I checked the trash can. It was clean and empty and we just watched. And we found just little pieces of that chocolate. So we asked for a video camera that someone offered us before. It could record for long hours. I want to clarify at this point that we didn't take the decision of everything you are about to read just because of a chocolate. The chocolate was the last straw. For like a year, we had to put up with our bosses scolding us because of him. He never wanted to learn how to do his job, and things were always disappearing, including personal things. The first day, Donna left money in one of her drawers and left it slightly open so he could see the money. We put the camera in other building that was in front of ours. We had big windows, floor to ceiling, and you could watch Donna's desk in the hallway, some lady's office, our door, and the director's office. The other building just had empty offices then, but had big curtains. That's why Mario couldn't see the camera. We went home that day and left the camera recording. The next day, there was the money, maybe because we left one billet equivalent to $5 and he knew we would know he took it. I checked the camera and watched him getting in the lady's office. I don't know what she did there. And he took some cookies from her office. But he looked suspicious. Again, with this we couldn't do much, so that night John found an old cell phone that could record for 2 hours. The next day, Donna left the $5 again, but now she left $1 bills and the same drawer slightly open. We placed the camera in the other building, and John disguised his old cell phone with a binder and some sticky tape. That day, he got a loan for a little less than 2 hours and left. John and me had a car, so we were in mall close there, just killing time, and then we went back. For the cell phone. OMG! John watched a little bit of the video before the battery died. He said he saw something weird but wasn't sure because the screen was very damaged, and we were in the car. I was driving. When we got in John's house, we could watch everything he had done inside our office. Not the other camera because the building was closed and we didn't have access to it until the next day. First, we saw him getting in the office, watching some YouTube, everything normal. Then he went out, and when he came back, we saw him putting something in his pocket, but it wasn't clear what. Then we saw how easily he took a pencil, opened the kitchen's door, and took something like a yogurt. Then he closed the door. Though we could hear that he was watching something like a channel that's very famous in our country. But then we heard noises, that kind of noises. We were supposed to have blocked that kind of videos and websites. I mean, those were government offices and the IT team had checked recently everything. But some way he was watching porn on the computer I used to work. And if you are thinking, if he did what you are thinking, the answer is yes. Thanks God the cell phone didn't record his hands, but you could see his shoulder moving and him licking his finger. I know, very disgusting. Well, he ended and didn't even wash his hands. I was so shocked and disgusted when I saw that I wanted to cry. The next day, the first thing I did was to call the IT department to clean the computer. We didn't say why, because of obvious reasons. John took the camera, and we could watch him when he went out of the office and checked carefully if somebody was around. Then he went to Donna's desk and took $1. He went inside the woman's office and took something, but we couldn't see what. Then he went into our office. We called Donna to our office, and she was shocked. Then Sarah watched the video as soon as she got there. Then the director arrived, and we asked him and Amy to go to our office. We showed them the video. The director was very young and trusted us a lot, so he didn't hold his laughter when the self-love pat began. Amy was a young and delicate woman, so she just turned around and covered her eyes while letting a small scream out. We finally get the proof needed to fire him. When he got to work, they didn't let him in. I don't know how the conversations went, but I know some of the words exchanged. Amy, you stole again, and we told you, and last time we told you it was your last chance. Mario, raising his voice, I didn't do anything. You're always blaming me. Amy, we have proof. Mario, you don't have anything. All of you hate me. Amy, don't make me show you. Mario, Well, show me. Amy called our office. John, could you bring the videos? John, the first one, the video camera one, or the second, the cell phone one? Amy, the second one. When he heard that he was defeated and very nervous, John took his time downloading the video into his computer because it was in mine and went to the office Amy was talking to Mario. John told me he was about to show him the video and then he asked Mario, John, Mario, do you really want to watch this video? Mario. He couldn't even watch John in the eyes. No, I don't want. Amy. Play at least the first video for him. John. I don't have that one. Let me go for it. I admit that I just wanted to see Mario's face, so I went to that office to give them an USB, but he didn't really watch me. Amy. To John and me. Okay, thank you. That's going to be all. And we left the office. We know she said something like, Amy, after playing the video, you always said it was us and even told your mom that we wanted to get you in trouble all the time. You even told really bad things about this place. You are fired, and we don't ever want to hear about you complaining to anybody else in the Central, or we're going to show these 2 videos to your mom. And he just left. Then we heard that he actually told lies to her mom like, Mario. They hated me and told lies to make them fire me. But no one ever told his mom. Not that I know. Well, this story made me realize that someone could be recording me anywhere I go. I mean, even I did it to someone. The revenge was truly masterclass. Jenny and John navigated a difficult situation with clever strategy and patience, culminating in the perfect exposure of Mario's wrongdoings. Their meticulous planning transformed a frustrating scenario into satisfying revenge, ensuring he faced the consequences he deserved. The next story is from Snoo Owl's 1775. Landlord tries to rip me off for $400, ends up having to pay me over $6.5K. Last year I moved out of a house that I had rented for 5 years with no problems. I always had a good relationship with the landlord. There are 2 relevant bits of background to this story. 1. In the UK, where I live, the standard practice when renting a house is to sign a tenancy agreement for a year. At the end of the year, if you want to stay in the house and the landlord is happy with that, you can just do nothing and the tenancy will continue automatically until either tenant or landlord gives notice. Alternatively, you can sign a new 1-year tenancy agreement each year, which isn't really necessary, but some landlords want it. My landlord wanted me to sign a new tenancy agreement each year. Fine, whatever. So, since I rented the house for 5 years, there were 5 tenancy agreements in total. 2. By law, the landlord was required to protect my security deposit. That meant that she had to put it into a special kind of account within 30 days of receiving it. The tenant then receives login details for the account so that they can check that it's protected and view various info about it. One point of doing this is so that the deposit is held by an independent party who can mediate if the landlord and tenant disagree about any deductions. There is a dispute process that the tenant can request and which is free for the tenant to use. So, I'd been living in the house for almost 5 years and I gave notice to end the tenancy because I was buying a house. After I'd given notice, the landlord emailed me to ask if I was planning to hire a gardener to ensure that the garden would be returned to the pretty manicured state it was in when I moved in. I thought this was strange because my tenancy agreement explicitly forbade me from doing the sorts of things in the garden that would have been necessary to maintain its original state. E.g., it said that I was not allowed to lop any shrubs or bushes. So, all I'd been doing is cutting the grass and the hedge. Basically, that clause looked like something that a landlord would include if they planned to maintain the garden themselves, except she didn't maintain it while I was living there. In retrospect, it seems that she didn't read her own tenancy agreement properly. I replied to the landlord's email about the garden. I quoted the part of the tenancy agreement that forbade me from doing certain things in the garden and expressed my confusion. I asked her to clarify what her expectations were about the state of the garden, given what it said in the tenancy agreement. She didn't reply, But a couple of weeks later, I received an email from her boyfriend telling me that the landlord was anxious about the garden and I should ensure that it is returned to the same state as at the start of the tenancy. I replied to him and again asked for clarification, given the wording of the tenancy agreement. He replied saying he'd have the landlord get back to me herself, which she never did. Without any guidance about the garden, I just did my best with it. My boyfriend, who is an experienced gardener, did the work here. I asked him just to do whatever he thought was best. He cut back bushes and cleared loads of stuff. I spent a few $100 on having garden waste removed. I knew that technically I did not need to do that, but wanted to do what I could to keep relations good between me and the landlord. I moved out, the tenancy ended, and after not hearing anything from the landlord for a couple of weeks, and not having my deposit back, I emailed the landlord to ask about the deposit. Having ignored my queries about the garden before the end of the tenancy, she chose this moment to announce that she wanted to deduct $400 from my deposit to carry out work on the garden. There followed a really time-wasting back and forth by email in which I pointed out that the terms of the tenancy agreement were incompatible with my being able to maintain the original state of the garden, and she just kept repeating that the garden was not returned to her in its original state. In the end, I suggested that since we couldn't agree about deductions from my deposit, we should use the independent dispute process offered by the company that was holding the deposit. That process needs to be kicked off by the landlord, so I asked her to authorize it. She didn't do that. Instead, she kept wasting my time by sending me emails trying to negotiate an amount to put the garden right, which I wasn't going to entertain. Meanwhile, I could not log into the account where my deposit was being held. I contacted the company, and it turned out that my landlord had accidentally input my email address incorrectly when registering the deposit, which I found very strange because she had emailed me successfully dozens of times throughout the time I was living in the house, so she definitely knew my email address. Without being able to log in, I was unable to officially dispute any deductions she was proposing. There is a window of 3 months after the end of the tenancy when you can dispute any deductions. After that, you either take what the landlord is willing to return or go to court. Apparently, according to Justice for Tenants, who I contacted for advice, it's relatively common for unscrupulous landlords to register their tenants' details incorrectly in an attempt to make it harder for them to recover their deposits in the time frame available for disputes. I had a long back and forth with the deposit company, after which I finally gained access to my deposit account. When I got into it, I looked at the info and noticed that the landlord had not protected my deposit until the day after I gave her notice to end the tenancy. That meant she protected my deposit well after the 30-day deadline by which she was supposed to do it by law. There are penalties for landlords that fail to comply with the laws around tenancy deposits. If they break the rules and the tenant takes them to court, they have to return the full deposit plus between 1 and 3 times the amount of the deposit as compensation. Also, they are not allowed to make any deductions from a tenant's deposit if they haven't complied with the law. I emailed the landlady a bit more firmly than I had previously. Things had been cordial, but increasingly frosty. I pointed out that she could not make any deductions from my deposit because she had not complied with the law. She responded by sending me quite a tantrum, insulting email, and authorizing the return of my full deposit. So, yay for the deposit back. But what a bitch insulting me when I hadn't done anything wrong. I was pissed off by the fact that she tried to rip me off and wasted hours and hours of my time trying to sort this out. Not to mention the stress. Just seeing an email from her land in my inbox caused my stomach to flip by this point. This is when things started to get a bit more exciting. As I said above, landlords who don't comply with the law around tenancy deposits have to pay between 1 and 3 times the value of the deposit in compensation, plus return the full deposit if they get taken to court. The documentation from the tenancy deposit scheme proved that she had broken the law. I'd already had my deposit back, but it was clear that if I took her to court, I would receive a minimum of that amount again. Except, of course, I didn't have just the one tenancy agreement with her. As I already mentioned, she had insisted on my signing a new tenancy agreement every year. So I'd had 5 tenancy agreements in total. I spent a few hours checking the law and going through old emails and documentation, and it turned out that she had failed to protect my deposit correctly in all of the 5 tenancies I had with her. I had a ton of documentation to prove that. That meant that, if I took her to court, I stood to receive a minimum of not 1, but 5 times the amount of my original deposit, over 6.5K. It would cost me a couple of $100 to take her to court, and I was 100% willing to do that. In fact, at this point, I was relishing that prospect. In order to take her to court, I first had to send her a letter before action, in which I set out my complaint against her and gave her an opportunity to make an offer to avoid going to court. I had a barrister friend who was helping me out at this point with advice, for free. The landlord replied to my letter quite dismissively, basically saying that it was, clearly, just an admin error that caused her to fail to protect my deposit correctly every year for 5 years, LOL, and accusing me of being motivated by a windfall. I replied by email, correcting her various mistaken assumptions and repeating the need for her to make an offer in order to avoid court. After a while, she replied and offered me $4,000. I told her that the minimum I would accept was a little over 6.5K. I forget the exact figure, since that was the minimum I would stand to get in court. She agreed, with certain conditions attached, perhaps conditions that she thought I might not be able to fulfill, things like sending her copies of all the documentation relating to the deposit for previous year's tenancies, but which I was able to do immediately. When the money landed in my bank account, I emailed her to explain that I would have dropped my complaint against her immediately had she at any point offered a sincere apology. Which was true, at least up until that final email where she insulted me. I also said that I hoped she would deal more fairly and reasonably with future tenants. She didn't reply. I hope that I will never again be a tenant, but having spent many years being kicked around by shitty landlords and letting agents, it was satisfying to end my renting days with such a satisfying and profitable middle finger. The revenge was truly perfect and satisfying. It was very satisfying to see the negligent and greedy landlord paying 6.5K. It is a perfect lesson for entitled landlords. It was genuinely a great revenge where justice was served with perfection and precision. The story is from Forest Cabin 123K. Bridezilla Karen ends up looking like a pauper at her own wedding. I, F48, have known Pat, F48, for decades. As far as I can remember, she was fixated on having 5 children and a picket fence dream life. I slowly cut ties with her in college because she was an opportunist and I didn't trust her. She is both manipulative and forceful. Her idea of cute rubs me the wrong way. Pat likes to walk like a penguin when she wants to elicit pity, and she usually does this when she wants to evoke the underdog narrative. I've never seen someone act so despicable and ridiculous at the same time. I moved on with my life. Happily, got rid of her for years. Pat eventually found me on Facebook. I accepted her friend request out of politeness. Pat has become the epitome of a permissive mother. Her 5 kids do as they please, and she never calls them out. She tried to force a relationship between me and her daughters and made them call me auntie. Pat tried to drop them at my house uninvited. Her phone calls were insistent. She tried to monopolize my time, and she began to show up at my job. I created some boundaries, so she tried to find loopholes. It was a nightmare. My husband and I hosted a party for the community center, not the real name, new members. The community center is actually a very informal initiative, and my husband and I mainly serve the homeless population. We prefer to help strangers instead of catering to potentially narcissistic acquaintances. We don't mind lending a hand, but we have encountered truly dishonest choosing beggars. There are other services, like one of the members who helps women get their wedding and prom dresses for free. The community center location, headquarters, is actually a farm owned by an elderly couple. There is a barn, a venue, and a very nice green field with an artificial lake and some fowl. They charge for the use of their facilities, weddings, etc., but not for community-oriented stuff. Pat had always been salty at her husband for demanding that she goes back to work after baby number 3. In the meantime, He worked 3 jobs. She demanded he get her pregnant to fulfill her dream of having 5 kids. He didn't agree because he was already nearly 45 and felt like he might never be able to retire. She got away with bringing new babies into this world anyway. Her fascination with being pregnant comes from all the attention she gets. She had at least 1 miscarriage in between each kid. Pat latched onto our group. She never missed any of our activities. I hated having her in my house, but it was an open invitation that included virtually everyone, and she was very active as an event organizer. I didn't like the way her kids behaved. We have a designated area for parties and entertainment, but her kids ended up inside my bedroom. We ended up having to keep watch of them and enjoyed 0 of our own party. I called her days later to get my point across regarding their overall behavior, but she completely cut me off and began talking about herself and said her kids wanted to come visit again and use our pool. I never answered that. I didn't want to say, "No, I will not have your brats over." She also called me as summer was approaching specifically to let me know her middle daughter was bored and wanted to spend a week at our home. I politely declined, citing that me and my husband have to work and cannot entertain guests. Pat paid no heed. Her kid called me on the weekend, calling me auntie, and attempted to coax me by saying, "Mom says you invited me to spend summer with you." I quickly clarified and offered an explanation to avoid hurting a kid's self-esteem. Never mind, her daughter just hung up on me. Pat's Facebook also showed some red flags. Some cryptic rants here and there were visible, along with friends' comments and complaints on how she asked a particular person to watch her kids only for a couple of hours and ended up leaving them all day. Another of her friends criticized her girls' night out because Pat had just asked them to be patient and wait until she could pay back some money that she owed them. Yet she had money to spend on Friday night outings. I thought those very public comments on private matters were more like a cry of lost patience. Unpleasant things began to happen, like the time she volunteered to wrap the Xmas presents for underprivileged kids. We all wanted to create a mix of less costly gifts with really nice ones. Surprisingly, some nice and eye-catching toys and games went missing, but turned up under her Christmas tree, courtesy of her mother-in-law's FB posts. No one could prove anything, but it was hate-inducing. Or the time my daughter called me in tears to pick her up after she attended Pat's daughter's birthday, Casey. My daughter had been ignored all night because she didn't gift her the expensive gaming stuff Casey practically demanded. My daughter did ask, but I said no. We would buy her a very nice and thoughtful present, according to her taste. So when I went to pick her up, my daughter was sitting alone in the living room, while Casey and her friends stayed outside. Stories about Pat and her family multiplied. The owners at the farm, community centre, decided keep their gates locked unless they had guests or events because Pat got in the habit of driving in whenever she pleased, and it was either her kids screaming and disturbing ongoing weddings, throwing rocks at the koi in the lake, or harassing the geese in the yard. Or how she stiffed another soccer mum with the lunch bill and then pulled the struggling financially card. Or how other parents hated her because she created unnecessary hostile competition. When my daughter turned 13, I allowed her to wear my grandma's ring. It's not an expensive piece of jewelry, but it's vintage, and girls nowadays want to look boho. My granny gave it to me when I became a teenager, so I passed it on to my kid so she could wear it on her birth week. It was weird that she became quiet and distracted after that. She also didn't want to go to school, and my husband and I became suspicious. She never opened up, and my other kids had no clue. We went to her school, but her teachers assured us nothing had changed in her environment. My husband and I suspected she was being bullied, but our kid gave us no tools to support her. My kid is very sunny and very compassionate. She has never had any problems with other kids. I called her best friend's mom. Natalie, my kid's BFF, told us what was going on. Casey, Pat's eldest, and my daughter had become close. I knew this and wasn't too thrilled. I found the age, Casey was 17, gap not exactly inappropriate, but I'd rather see my daughter spend time with friends in the same age range. Casey is very beautiful and a gifted student. She is also very conceited. To make this story short, she asked my daughter if she could try on the ring and refused to give it back. She later claimed that she lost it, but would look for it, so my daughter was distraught. My daughter kept asking for her ring, and as a result, Casey shunned her and spread the word that my kid was trying to steal her ring. Some kids at school took Casey's side, so now Casey just wore my kid's jewelry to school like nothing happened. If that doesn't qualify as taunting, I don't know what does. My guilt comes from not being able to get my daughter to open up and feel safe telling me the truth. I talked to her, and she burst into tears. I was both pained as a mother and furious that some teenage bitch was doing this under our noses. I went straight to Pat's car after school. I asked to talk as Casey was about to go in. So I grabbed Casey's hand and asked to see her jewelry. Casey froze and she tried to make a fist, so I became relentless. Casey yelled, "Mom!" and Pat struggled to get out of the car. I slid the ring off. Casey has tiny hands and wore the ring on her index finger. First, Pat yelled at me. After I confronted her with the engraving on the band, my grandma's maiden name, she argued it was loaned to her daughter by my kid. Then she said she bought it. I paid no heed. I did warn them that I knew Casey had become an abusive friend to my daughter. Pat called me to tell me off. She said she was trying to raise an assertive young woman, and I had just messed that up by being overbearing. She never apologized for her thief of a child. Pat's husband, Hank, is what can be described as a doormat. Pat wore him down to a knob. He had no choice but to obey her to keep the peace. She was a bully who actively withdrew affection when he didn't follow her wishes, even in public. So she got kids, before and number 5, after a relentless campaign that included leaving him for 2 months. Her pregnancies were a nuisance because she expected to be treated like the only lady who has even been pregnant. She strolled around in a wheelchair almost immediately after getting pregnant, and she would get very sick on weekends, so her kids were often sent to friends and family so that she could rest. Pat systematically bullied Hank. She would leave town and take the kids with her. Poor Hank would look distraught, drinking on his porch or just looking really lonely. This is how she got off the hook and was able to leave her job. Hank had virtually no voice, so he struggled to keep the marriage together. Everyone liked him, but hated her equally. Hank loved to talk to other people, but seemed concerned that Pat would be upset. Over time, according to my husband, Hank began to show signs of depression and mental distress. Our friend, Lena, runs the Wedding Prom Dress Initiative. It's not complicated. Dresses are sourced from donations, eBay, trunk shows, etc. Unusually beautiful dresses are retained so that more than one bride gets to wear them. In some cases, a bride will pay $50, but most of the time, the dresses are donated to the bride. Pat was involved in this. Lena kept her in because they never had any issues and her task was limited to just shipping the dresses out. Pat decided to renew her vows, and her bridezilla, Karenzilla attitude became the icing on the cake. For starters, she bullied another couple into giving up their wedding date at the farm because she needed her renewal to match her exact wedding date. They were not impressed with her harassment, so they booked another venue. As a result, the farm owners were pissed because Pat was already costing them money after she had successfully negotiated a cut in their rate because she couldn't afford it but will repay by doing maintenance work around the venue. She never made good on her word. Pat became attached to a particular dress that was already assigned to another bride. Lena made it clear that she would need to pay for her own dress. So Pat played it cool and shipped the wrong gown instead. She was adamant that it was the right dress, despite all the notes on Leah's agenda. The other bride was truly gracious about it. She was obviously disappointed, but never made a scene. What bothered me most is that I picked that dress and bought it for $40 at a garage sale. Not my money, Leah's money. It was a vintage dress, ankle length, white with lots of lace, and a huge bargain. Again, when confronted, Pat did a Casey and used the "this is mine" strategy. We felt so bad for the other bride that we did our best to get her something nice to wear. The other bride was a true fighter. She had pulled out of welfare. earned her high school diploma, and was working to get on her feet by trying to earn a certificate as an acrylic nail technician. So, her reward was to have some Karen steal her dress? Pat never admitted to messing up, but just by the fact that she claimed it was her dress, we knew. Lena never allowed her in her warehouse again. Their last phone fight ended with Pat bringing up the other bride's past, like it mattered, and, "This conversation is over. It's my dress, and you are mistaken." That was weeks before the other bride's wedding. Pat went all out on her wedding decor. She spent way too much. She hired a caterer for some food, mainly mimosas and appetizers, but the wedding invitation included a request for specific dishes for her Sunday brunch wedding. Either she ran out of banquet money or was on a complete moocher mode. I picture the penguin walking upon practically asking everyone to supply her wedding reception grub, and I cringe. There is nothing wrong with potluck weddings. In fact, they can be a nice addition to a very cozy and family-oriented wedding reception. But don't you need to at least be close to your guests in order to ask for such a thing? Even I got an invitation. I told everyone I wasn't going because I was very uncomfortable being told what to bring, and was probably expected to give them a cash gift on top of that. Some of the older ladies in our group agreed. Some said they would not decline in advance because she is a bully, and they didn't want a confrontation. Lena called me the night before Pat's re-wedding. Lena was there to close the Saturday night bingo, and Pat was awfully friendly. But that's what she does whenever things are going her way. Lena peeked into the garment bag and saw the exact same dress, while Pat was caught up supervising the wedding decoration. The thing with Karens is that they expect everyone to suck it up, or make their dreams come true, or they simply underestimate everyone and think we are all fools. Lena is a very straightforward person with a "so sue me" attitude. She told me she would just ruin the dress. After all, it was hers, so she could do whatever she wanted. If Pat wanted to take legal action, and should things get ugly, she needed to prove ownership. However, the dress was the same. The marks inside the hem and the tags were the same. Even the tag numbers that were punched to identify each dress for logistics purposes matched. Pat had the dress altered, with some extra beading, and dyed to a deep cream color. But it was obviously the same garment. Lena and I snuck in before the venue was closed for the night. All brides are allowed to stay in a small bedroom for a small charge, so that they don't need to drive in on their wedding day. Honestly, the makeshift chapel was gorgeous. I don't know how she paid for it, but it was full of flowers and presumptuous details. I naively brought in some ink to spill on the dress, but Lena said she wanted something more awful, like a nasty surprise. Ink would be too obvious, and if she saw it ahead, she may be able to snag another gown from somewhere. No, the ideal thing was to have her trust. The dress was fine. So Lena locked herself in a bathroom stall and completely cut out the back panel. She patiently put it back on its hanger and zipped the bag. We left through the emergency door with the back of the dress stuffed inside Lena's purse. I completely hate people who target and steal from anyone they, Pat and her kid, calculate to be in a weaker position. The wedding was scheduled at 9 a.m. Pat called me at 7 a.m., but I ignored her calls. I picked up by 8 a.m., both curious and wondering if she suspected anything. Pat was frantic. She was crying that her dress was missing by half. I purposely made her explain, being annoyingly dense and continually interrupting like she does, and stalling the conversation. She asked me if I could lend her my wedding dress. I said no, sorry. She then asked me if I would help her get a dress. I was satisfied to remind her that the town's bridal shops were closed on Sunday, and the others that would open were almost an hour away. The farm is already almost 1 hour away from our town. If Pat could get a shop to rent a dress, she would need to try the dress on and get it steamed. Even if the dress was ready to wear, it would easily take more than 2 hours, round trip. She tried to ask me to go pick a dress. Who would pay for this? Even if a shop were open and brought her a dress, it would add to the cost. Also, these shops open at 10 or 9:30 at earliest. By time they got to her, it would be time to wrap up the wedding because she needed to clear the venue by 12 mod for the next event. She broke down and mumbled some stupid stuff I didn't understand. So Pat hung up on me and called Lena instead. She asked Lena to bring her anything she had available. Lena and I ended up delivering the most outdated, moss-smelling, oversized dress. Pat's disappointment was a mix between angry and emotional. She also tried to wear her knee-length silk bridal slip as a wedding dress, but it was too obvious and it really looked cheap. She tried to get her daughter to give her own dress to wear with an open back zipper due to fitting issues. But Casey refused, asking if she was supposed to attend the wedding naked. She got a point, plus Casey is petite. The dress needed a petticoat to plump up the skirt, which wasn't available. So it dragged all over the floor, and Pat had to keep pulling it up. Pat walked down the aisle with one hand on her bouquet and another one grabbing her dress. The dress looked limp and weird with the arrangements of pins, they didn't show, that caused the sleeves and neckline to pucker into messy rims. She spent the ceremony looking uncomfortable and out of place. Very few people attended, but that was not part of any revenge. That was just how people reacted to her entitled attitude. The dress looked awful. The reception portion of the wedding had all this princely decoration, a very nice cake, and a bridezilla with a dress from hell. I didn't stay, but I was told she was so disappointed she spent her wedding sulking. There was no dance, no actual speech. She had to change into a shirt and leggings because the dress was too uncomfortable. Everyone talked about how Pat put on her flip-flops and walked around aimlessly until she ordered the ushers to start folding up the chairs within 1 hour of the reception. So she practically kicked everyone out, and the cake was never cut. Pat wasn't the same after this. She was not as loud and avoided everyone. I think she was disappointed that nobody ran to her rescue, not even her family who came from out of town. Her husband finally cracked under all the pressure and sought some help. He was slaving away and coming home to clean the house, while Pat used her kids as an excuse to spend like crazy. Hank also had to do kid homework because Pat never had time or never had patience. She also refused to get a part-time job so her kids could attend an after-school and get help with their school stuff. Therapy seemed to help Hank because the last time Pat left with her kids, he didn't seem distraught. He would be riding his bicycle and could be seen more relaxed while mowing his lawn. Hank told my husband that he had contemplated suicide after their third kid. When Pat returned, he maintained the routine but was interested in going out by himself and doing things for himself. We began to see Pat alone all the time. Hank was seen less and less in the same car and eventually moved in with his parents. He filed for divorce on the grounds of emotional cruelty, and I don't think he won. Instead, I'm not sure of this because this is what I was told, there was some sort of a settlement or agreement that she would not get close or interact with him unless it has to do with the kids. I also don't know if Pat even actually suspected what happened to her dress. She slowly pulled away from the community center and became less active in social gatherings. Pat also removed me from her Facebook as well as mostly everyone else from school and the center. Edit. TLDR. Bridezilla stole a wedding dress from an underprivileged woman. The actual dress owner destroys her big day. Edit. Regarding my kid, there were no prior incidents. Pat, her family, and my family were not friends. I did see her often. After Casey's birthday incident, there were no additional situations until what happened with the ring. After that, Casey played the OP treated me badly card because I physically removed the ring from her hands, but I honestly don't feel I need to protect her emotions. Edit. Thanks to everyone who took their time to read. Thanks for the nice and kind comments and even the naysayers or aggressive ones. I understand we are all different, and some situations can seem enraging or so difficult we instantly want to fix it by reacting or by reproaching. It's human nature to instantly go for, this is what should have happened instead. I appreciate your input. Even the mocking, raging, and scrutinizing ones show me indignation, and this is good. No one has yet said, I love what Pat did, and that shows we are still striving for a fairer and balanced life. Even the snide comments show me this has gotten under your skin, and I try not to judge. The lovely and supportive Redditors who have shown kindness are also very appreciated. The revenge was really perfect and satisfying. It was a clever plan that exposed Pat's entitlement while leaving her humiliated on a significant day. The outcome not only taught her a lesson, but also freed those around her from her toxic influence. The very interesting pro-revenge story from To See You Low. Fate helped me get back at my brother. I originally posted this in 2 parts as it was unfolding on our relationship advice, and a couple people told me to post it here. I didn't know this sub existed, but I'm happy it does. So, my brother, 23M, we're twins, is so mean. He's constantly doing messed up stuff to me, 23F, but the worst thing happened 5 years ago. I got my first boyfriend when I was 18 and a senior in high school. I know we were young, but I really, really, really loved him. We'd been dating for 10 months when my brother randomly decided, for literally no reason at all, to make up a story about how he caught me cheating and tell it to my boyfriend. He planned it all out. He came up with details. He made it sound real. And because he's such a scarily good liar and a master manipulator, my boyfriend believed him. No matter what I said or did to prove it wasn't true, he believed my brother over me. My brother kept up with his act the entire time and refused to admit he was lying. At one point, I thought I'd finally gotten my boyfriend to believe me, but then he broke up with me a few months later and confessed it was because he was still convinced I'd cheated on him, and he couldn't move past it. He said, "The worst part is that you won't just tell me the truth, and not to sound dramatic, but that still haunts me. I want to cry every time I think about it." And I still miss him to this day. Also, I think it's important to note that my brother has never once apologized. He's so insanely mean that he just thinks it's funny. I even asked him once if he'd consider hitting my ex up and telling him the truth for my peace of mind, and he just laughed at me. I never got over what my brother did, and I always told myself I was going to do the exact same thing to him one day. He's dated several girls since high school, but he'd never been serious enough about any of them for me to consider tricking them. I knew it wouldn't hurt him like he hurt me if I just tricked one of his flings or something. But he finally got his first serious girlfriend last year, and after thinking about it for a long time, I decided I was going to do it. We live in different places now, so I had to do it all online. I used a different method than he did. I contacted his girlfriend pretending to be the girl he'd been cheating with. I made up an elaborate, detailed story like he did to me, and even photoshopped proof and stuff. I made my story even more believable than he made his. And exactly like he did to me, I went as far as denying it even to him, because I knew he might use my text-like calls to prove to his girlfriend that it isn't true. He knew I was behind it, though, solely because the girl I made up doesn't exist, and there's no one else that would do this. But I kept denying it. His girlfriend wholeheartedly believed me, and my brother kept calling and texting me and begging me to give it up, even though I still wouldn't admit it was me. He was manipulating me and arguing that it's different because I was younger when he did it to me, and my relationship wasn't serious. But my relationship was serious, and like I said, I still miss my ex. My brother really, really messed me up. I have empathy, though. He doesn't. And I was starting to feel bad for his girlfriend because she's innocent. I was kind of regretting everything and thinking that maybe I should tell his girlfriend the truth, for her sake, not his. But then, his girlfriend asked me a question, which led to her admitting that she's been suspicious of him for a long time. So I pried a little bit and encouraged her to look through his phone. She told me she couldn't because she didn't know the passcode and he wouldn't give her access to it. I guessed a few passcodes I thought it could be, and gave them to her under the guise of seeing it once, but not being sure which one I'd seen. That was kind of dumb, but I couldn't think of anything else to say, and she didn't question it. She got in because it ended up being the same one he's had since 2012, when our dad got us iPhones and made us use the same passcode. Idiot. Anyway, lo and behold, it turns out my brother actually cheated on her, and my setup was the reason she found out. He's been talking to and hooking up with multiple girls for pretty much the entirety of their relationship. I'm not surprised, because he's a terrible person and cheating seems right up his alley. But I'm shocked at the same time. I literally can't believe things worked out this perfectly. It feels like a dream or something. The universe loves me. I hate to revel in his girlfriend's misery, but I was feeling guilty about her being collateral damage, so I feel like this is the best possible outcome. My lie ended up being the truth. Well, not exactly, but you know what I mean. So I didn't scar his GF or leave her with permanent damage for no reason. All my interference did was speed up the process of the truth coming to light. In fact, my brother may have been able to hide his cheating forever, if not for me. He probably would have just manipulated his GF and/or refused to give her phone access forever. She hasn't broken up with him, and I'm honestly not sure if she will. IDK, how relevant that is, but it attests to how manipulative he is. He screws people over all the time, but somehow always gets his way anyway. It's honestly infuriating and scary. Anyway, I'm still not going to admit to my brother that I'm behind it all because there's no point. That would just get me in deeper trouble. I got a comment on my original post that said, "Deny till you die, baby." And that's exactly what I'm planning on doing, LOL. Life's crazy. The revenge was really crazy and mind-blowing, and OP executed it was perfect, and hit his brother where it hurts the most. His brother faced the consequences he deserved. It was really satisfying and cool. The best part of the revenge is the OP brother got his relationship for the cheating he never did. Really mind-blowing. Very interesting Reddit story from Bright Glaive. Entitled, "Neighbor Complains About Our Noise. Ends up losing $8,000. Sometime around 2002, my wife and I moved into an 1,100 square feet condominium with 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. We were very fortunate to get this condominium as a second owner, and we paid only $114,000, $6,000 more than the original price. Our condo was on the 3rd floor, and all rooms were carpeted throughout the condo with only one small 4x4 square of linoleum inside the front door to the outside breezeway. This will become important later. And yes, even the bathrooms, kitchen, and dining room were carpeted. The front door opened to a large open space with vaulted ceilings with the great room to the left, and the dining room and kitchen to the right. The kitchen area was separated from the great room with a wall that had a cutout over the kitchen sink, and we had a long hallway directly going out of the great room to all the bedrooms and straight in front of the front door. We got to know some of the neighbours and got along well with most of them. The neighbours directly below us were a young couple that were attending university and were nice and cordial with us. Shortly after they graduated, they rented out their condo to her brother and his college friends. The brother was a decent guy, and we mostly had no problems, except for one of his birthdays, where their music and boisterous conversations and happy birthdays, etc., kept us up until 4:30 a.m. in the morning. My wife and I returned the favour by blasting our music the very next morning at 8:00 a.m. But we talked a couple of weeks later and all had a laugh about it and never had any real problems after that. Between 2004 and 2006, we changed all the flooring in the kitchen and dining room to ceramic tile, including the area in front of the front door, to avoid having to pay for carpet cleaning in the dining or kitchen area due to spills or our young daughter throwing food on the floor from her high chair. In 2007, our cordial neighbours sold their condo to an older newlywed couple, late 20s to early 30s. Now, if anyone has lived in between a first and a third floor condo or apartment, you will know that it is the worst place to be if you expect silence. With kids or music, you will always have some noise that filters through the floor or ceiling. I don't know what they were thinking or expecting when they moved in there. I was blissfully unaware that the condo had been sold until one day, about a month later, I brought home a powered subwoofer and hooked it up to my home theatre sound system, around 6 p.m. I promptly put on an action flick with some big explosions and sat down to enjoy the new and improved immersive sound. After a little bit of gunfire and 2 explosions, I hear the doorbell ding-dong. I get up and immediately hear ding-dong again. I walk the 5FT to my front door and open it to see my entitled neighbour, I'll call her Karen, standing on my doorstep. Me. "Hi, can I help you?" Very agitated Karen. My husband and I are trying to enjoy a quiet and peaceful dinner. Can you please turn down whatever show you are watching? We can hear everything that's going on. Me. Oh, sure, sorry about that. She turned around and walked away. I closed the door, turned the subwoofer down a ways and the main volume down a bit and thought nothing of it. Shortly after the next round of gunfire and explosions, I hear the ding-dong, and then some rapid-fire knocking at my door. I paused my movie, and then I opened the door to see Karen again. Me. Hi. What can I do for you? Karen. We can still hear everything from your show. You need to turn it down now. At this point, I was a little fed up with her crap and decided to call her on it. Me. You say you can hear everything. Can you give me some of the last dialogue you heard? Karen. I don't know. I just know you are watching X show. She was totally wrong. Me. No, I am actually watching YYY movie, and here are the last 3 lines of dialogue. And I gave her those lines. Me. It seems you can't hear my movie as well as you are claiming. Karen, with blazing eyes and red in the face. I don't care. It's too loud. You need to turn it down. Me. Actually, noise ordinance says I don't have to turn it down until 10 p.m. Karen, getting huffy. Fine, I guess my husband and I will have to go out to eat to get some peace and quiet. Me, in my most cheerful voice and waving, have a good night. I then turned my subwoofer up a little and the main volume back up to its previous level and enjoyed the rest of my movie. The neighbours did end up going out that night for dinner or whatever. At our next HOA meeting, Karen stands up and complains long and loud about the noise. How she can hear kids jumping on the carpeted floor, we had a 4-year-old, and crying, we had a new baby, and hear us walking up and down our hallway, and hear our music and movies and TV shows, and how the Hispanic neighbours on the first floor play their music on Saturday morning so loud they can't sleep in, and argue so loud they can hear every word, etc., etc. This went on for 6 months. Every time she complained, the HOA told her, if it's between the hours of 8 a.m. 10 p.m., we can do nothing. If it's after 10 p.m. and before 8 a.m., you can call the police. And then the HOA would send out a letter by US mail asking everyone to be cognizant of their neighbours and laying out the local city noise ordinance. I finally stopped attending the HOA meetings after month 3 of the same bullcrap. She never failed to visit at least once or twice in the week after these notices, and twice she taped them to my door. I also learned during this time that they were members of our church and had actually been assigned to visit us each month. They never did. Cue the pro-revenge. Around the 6 to 7 month mark of her constant complaints and harassment, and even a couple of visits from some very apologetic police officers after 11 p.m. at night, they said they could hear nothing outside of my condo door. We decided to upgrade our flooring. We knew this would inflame our entitled neighbour, but we didn't care as we were tired of the constant stream of complaints from them. We chose to extend the entry tile all the way from the front door, down the long hallway to the master bedroom door, and we wanted to tile the bathrooms as well. We also went with a light coffee-coloured bamboo hardwood in our great room. So, demolition first. We tore out the carpet and tack strips and pried the base moulding trim off the walls. As I'm removing the last of the nails from the walls and subfloor, about noon on a Saturday, wouldn't you know it? Bang, bang, bang from the front door. Me? Yes? Karen. Can you keep it down? I'm trying to have a pampered chef party. Me? Sure. I promptly finished pulling or driving in nails and then proceeded to bang my hammer all over the subflooring like I was driving loads of new nails for the next hour, and made sure to turn on my stereo to the local hard rock station and turn it up for the next 4 hours. FYI, the one-erst floor neighbours were already blaring some great mariachi music. They did every Saturday and Sunday as they cleaned their condo from top to bottom. We then rented a hardwood floor mailer that, in addition to compressor noise and to loudly driving a nail into the flooring and subfloor, also had to be struck with a large dead blow hammer. Bang, bang, bang. It took us 2 to 3 days to install the coffee-colored bamboo hardwood flooring in the great room, and we were sure it was driving Karen absolutely batty. We ended up installing an awesome tile inlay down the hall, had tile running from the front door to the master bedroom door, along the great room side of the divider wall, tile in the dining room, kitchen, and both bathrooms. We got the base molding on, more nail gun and compressor fun, and caulked. The new floors looked amazing, and the bonus was every time a hard shoe, like my daughter's favorite Sunday shoes she wore everywhere, every day, or high heel, my wife chose to learn how to do everything in 4 to 6 inch stilettos during this time, struck the floor. It was like the impact echoed through our perfect floors. All this was due to our neighbor complaining. It was also in preparation to sell our condo, as we had grown out of it by this time. We sold it within 1 month of listing at $160,000. During closing, the real estate agent for the new owners told us that the floors absolutely sold this place. We also sold at the very top of the real estate boom right before the real estate market crashed. We later learned from some of our neighbours that within 9 months of our selling our condo, the second floor entitled neighbours moved out and sold their condo for $30,000 less than we had, and took about an $8,000 loss, and sent a letter of complaint to the HOA stating their condo was unlivable because of the noise from our incredible floors. The revenge was a perfect medicine for Karen, and it was executed flawlessly. By upgrading to noise-amplifying bamboo and tile flooring, the couple turned Karen's endless noise complaints into their weapon. They sold their condo at a significant profit, while Karen lost $30,000. Plus, she suffered an $8,000 fine that was really satisfying. One of the best karma hits.